buttons to turn on. I didn't want to burn the batteries up.
Okay, 6:30, so we'll call the planning commission meeting to meeting. We welcome you to come forward. This is not church. You want to sit in the back. All right, it looks like we got some minutes. We'll go right down the line, Kevin.
Yes, sir. Please.
Hey, Jim, come here.
Go sign in.
You gotta sign in your name and your.
If you intend on being seen,
Marie's gonna question.
put your name and address up there. So, Joe, go ahead. Because we're there, she's gonna say something.
For a motion?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the November 16th, 2022 meeting.
I'll second. Motion for approval, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Wow. Okay, next thing is set our meeting dates and times for 23.
Is everybody comfortable with where we're at? We've traditionally, for the last several years, at least my tenure, is we pretty much had these on the third Wednesday at 6:30, unless anybody has any other suggestions or would like to consider a change. Otherwise, I think a motion.
Want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to keep the meeting time the same as each meeting.
Okay. Second?
Second. Kevin, are we moving back to the city next month, or?
We are hopeful.
That's always good. Okay, we're moving, second, that we keep our third Wednesday at 6:30. All in favor?
Aye.
And so ordered. Okay, election of officers. You have any thoughts on that?
I move to keep the same officers we had in 2022.
I'll second that.
I would like to make a suggestion. I feel like, Dan's had an amazing run. Ever since I've been on the planning commission, he's been your chair. And so I would like to ask Dave if he would like to consider it too, and then we could discuss, and if not, then I'm fine with it.
I'm open either way.
I have no objection to what they do.
I will amend my motion to switch Dave and Dan around. Let Dave be the chairman and effective and the secretary. We'll do the next meeting.
You want to be the secretary?
Yeah, I can do secretary.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered.
So I'm sorry, just for clarity, we have Dave and then Dan,
Your secretary.
Dan G.
I'll stay vice.
Vice.
We did discuss
Okay.
that.
And then Dan Baylor is secretary?
We're just
Right.
Okay, okay. Sorry.
Different pay grade, but we can do it. Final Plat.
Yeah, so I apologize not getting this in your hands earlier. We've seen this before on a couple different occasions, actually, for the other units. They're just adding the 3 units there. It's really the same thing we've seen. All the improvements for the utilities and streets are in place. We had I had trouble getting a hold of the digital copy that I could make a copy that was able to be read. So It's very comparable to what we have seen for the other units. It's just adding these next 3 units.
Staff is happy with it?
Yes.
Bring the funds in.
Is there really a little notch in the way the right of way is on US 27? I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that was there. That's been there. I think we're adding the main difference is the next 3 units, and then there'll be one more for the last 2 units.
Yeah.
Excuse me, may I ask what property we're talking about? I don't understand that.
This is for the Pinnacle property. It's at 1 Highland. I'm sorry, not 1 Highland. at the Highland Country Club.
No, my
Yeah.
brother-in-law lives on that property.
Yeah, so it's just the next phase for the next buildings.
Okay, I didn't know what property we're talking about.
Sure.
Thank you.
I would just need a motion and going forward for approval.
This complies with the development plan that was approved previously. I'll make a motion to approve the section number 2.
Second. Moving and moving second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll move ahead to our zoning ordinance update.
Yes, just for an introduction for the crowd. We do have a sign-in sheet. We've got a little different format, trying to keep things in order, and so we've added a sign-in sheet. If there's any chance you might want to speak, please sign in now ahead of time, so we have your name and address. The recording didn't pick up some of that stuff in the past, so we just want to make sure we have a good record. So just please sign in. If there's any chance you might have a question, please sign in. Please speak clearly into the microphone, close to the microphone, the way these are set up. Hopefully when we get back to the city building, maybe next month, it'll be a little bit easier, but please just speak clearly and into the microphone. The format tonight, and this is what we'll be moving forward, will be Elisa will give a portion of her presentation, and she will ask for questions after each section. So there will be tonight, 3 or 4 sections that we'll be going through, and after each section, she'll prompt the crowd instead of having the interactive discussion, for which was a little distracting, and we really couldn't get a lot of progress. So we're going to progress, and she'll prompt you when you can speak. And if there's any other questions from the board, if not, we'll let Elisa take over.
Anybody hear me?
Kevin, I think we might have missed it. We didn't welcome our new commission member.
That was on my list, and I apologize. I actually would like to welcome Pam Twice to finally complete our board. She's very experienced in a different facet than some of our other board members, is why she was chosen. Actually, I would also like to introduce Mark Stewart. He is our new building inspector, zoning administrator, so he will be involved in these proceedings as well. He has a ton of experience as well, and actually went through a recent zoning code update in his prior city, so he's going to have a lot of valuable input for us. And welcome.
Very good.
Good evening, is that better? Okay. If I strike the microphone and just start waving at me, I'll try to speak into it. Good evening, I am Elisa Levy Rogers with CT Consultants, and with me this evening is Frank Williams, who's also with CT. And thank you so much for having us here this evening. So tonight we will briefly review the zoning update process, start to review the zoning districts, discuss the central business district, and what's the next steps. And as Kevin said, I will stop at the sections in the presentation, give the planning commission members some time to talk and discuss and ask questions, and then take comments and questions from community members. So the zoning ordinance update is resuming its point with some changes in content that we've talked about. The process remains essentially the same. We are adding an additional opportunity for community members to discuss the proposed changes and to ask questions, and those will happen on Thursdays following the planning commission meeting starting tomorrow at Fort Thomas Coffee in that back room from 10 to 12. You can just drop in, ask questions, talk, and walk into the next planning commission meeting. I will let the planning commission know the number of community members that came and report back their concerns, their questions, and their comments. And so that will happen, as I said, every Thursday following the planning commission meeting starting tomorrow. As we talked about previously, the zoning ordinance update is progressing in roughly 4 stages. We are in phase 2. Phase 2 is where we start fleshing out the zoning ordinance changes in what we call the blueprint document. In phase 3, we will formalize the zoning ordinance amendments and align the zoning map. This is the zoning ordinance. The map that you see over here is the current zoning map, and we thought it just might be helpful to have it up here. And then phase 4 is adoption. As I mentioned tonight, we will start reviewing the zoning districts. Next month, we will continue discussing the zoning districts that we will finish tonight. And then
Excuse me, we can't hear you.
Try to use a higher pitch and speak a little more slowly.
Okay, I'll try. As I mentioned, tonight we will go over the zoning district chapters. Next month, we will continue that discussion if we don't finish. And then we will do the administration chapters, which is development plan review, rezoning amendments, various other appeals. Then in March, we will cover the regulations applicable to all districts, and that's things like the side regulations, parking, those kinds of things. And then in the April meeting, we will do the subdivision ordinance and laptop. So moving forward, there will be 7 conventional zoning districts, including the central business district, which we haven't discussed previously. And tonight we will discuss some policy decisions and discussions regarding the central business district. Because the organizing principle for these conventional zoning districts really is land use, land use categories are broken into 3 different groups. There are uses that are permitted by right. So for example, that would be a single-family home is permitted by right in a single-family district, provided it meets all the standards in zoning code. There are conditional uses, which are uses that need special consideration and are part of a discretionary review. In Kentucky, that discretionary review is done by the Board of Adjustment. And then as we talked about previously, we are introducing restricted uses. And restricted uses are those that are permitted by right if they meet the additional standards in the zoning ordinance. And so as we move forward in this discussion, we will be talking about permitted, restricted, and conditional uses. So let's start with discussing the single-family and 2-family districts. We are retaining all of the existing single-family districts in the 2-family district. We are discussing adding 1 additional district, which is the R1 CBD, which we will discuss a little bit more in a few minutes. Right now, the existing 2-family dwellings in the R1B and the R1C are non-conforming uses. So let's be a little more clear about that. And the things that are the places that are in R1B and R1C, there are existing 2-family dwellings. And right now, they are non-conforming. And what that means is they were legally established at some point in the past, and then the zoning ordinance was either enacted or amended to make them prohibited uses. According to the Fort Thomas zoning ordinance, if you are a non-conforming use, that use cannot be expanded in any way. Meaning, if you want to add on to your porch, you would not be able to do so. And so the question that is currently before the Planning Commission, in the R1B and in the R1C, should the 2-family dwellings that currently exist be conditional, restricted, or continue to be non-conforming? And so again, the difference is being permitted by right, a restricted use, or a conditional use. What I would suggest as a restricted condition would be that you would have to be a 2-family unit that exists the day the ordinance is adopted. So therefore, all of the existing two-family become legalized and become conforming uses, but no new two-family dwellings could be placed within the R1B and the R1C. So all that does is legitimize the ones that are there and doesn't allow any new ones. So I'll open it up for discussion as well.
So if it's legitimized and they want to expand their porch or add a deck or whatever, they're allowed to do it then?
In terms of a use perspective, the answer is yes. Now, they still might have setback problems, but at least the use is non-conforming. In Kentucky, you cannot do anything with a non-conforming use. So if it's non-conforming, the answer is going to be no. But if they have a setback issue, at least they can go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for relief. The use would then become conforming if we allow it as a restricted use, with the restriction being that has to exist on the day that the ordinance is passed. What do you think? Continue to have them non-conforming, make them conditional, which means if they wanted to expand, they would have to go to the Board of Adjustment, or make them restricted?
What's the effect if we make them restricted as opposed to conditional?
So the effect would be, if it's restricted and they exist, and they file a building permit, Kevin and Mark can then just approve the building permit. They need that restriction. If you make it conditional, they would then have to go in front of the Board of Adjustment in order to do anything to their home other than some sort of interior changes.
So restricted is less restrictive than conditional.
Correct. It falls in the middle. And so keep in mind that the term permitted by right and the term conditional are terms that are used in KRS, right? So we have no ability to change conditional. And some people call, that middle use is sort of a term that's in flux in planning right now. Calling it a restricted use is sort of becoming the norm, but you will see it called things in many different things in many different jurisdictions.
I think this lends itself to trying to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, in that Elisa is going through and we're trying to adjust some of our zoning regulations to make it easier for people to make improvements on the property, and that's what this restricted use will do. It's going to make it easier. It's not going to open up the gates for any additional two families, but the two families that are there, it's going to give them the opportunity to make an improvement to their home without going through a lot of extra hoops. And I think that's kind of the goal of what we're trying to do with all of our zones. So, I mean, it certainly makes sense to me.
I think you had mentioned earlier, not tonight, how many properties are we talking that are affected by this? It would be, if we enacted this, it would be in any idea, 100, 200?
I really don't know. To give you, for an example, the new R1 CBD district, which was bordered by Hacker-One, that kind of thing. There are approximately 5 there. But like I was driving up Highland today, and noticed that there's one just sort of stuck in the middle of those single-family homes. And so they're sort of stuck in these neighborhoods, predominantly the older ones, all over the older section of town. And usually you don't even realize that they're two-family until you either see one of two things, that you notice there are 2 doors, or you see that there are 2 meters. But 9 times out of 10, you don't even notice that they're not a single-family detached dwelling. The ones that currently exist today.
So I can give you a reference. So I live in the Summit subdivision, and I just counted in my head back there. There's probably over 100 homes back there, and there's 4 that I'm aware of that are duplexes. And 2 are out front on Grand, but the other 2 are just like completely scattered.
And truthfully, I don't know of any way to try to figure out which ones are two-family. I mean, it's not like we can look at a map or do any sort of analysis.
I agree with Kevin, it makes sense to make it a restricted use and be able to deal with it at the staff level, rather than, like you said, jump through a bunch of hoops.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Kevin has to mess with it all the time.
Well, when we gotta tell people that they can't make an improvement to their home, that's a difficult thing. Or, even taking something to the Board of Adjustment that is a basic minimal improvement, such as a deck, a small deck or something, would still have to go before them if it's conditional use. So this is a perfect situation for us. And I think, and for our public, I think really is benefiting them.
So one other question regarding this is the R1 CBD. When we started having that conversation several weeks ago, we started with that the two families would be permitted by right. They're there, they exist. But there was some concern, again, that perhaps we just legitimize the ones that currently exist. So what I think I'm hearing is even in that new district, we would make them restricted. Is that what I'm hearing? Awesome. Okay. So let's move on. From 2016 to 2021, there have been 172 residential variance requests in the city, with most of those being in the R1B and the R1C zoning districts. These variance requests are predominantly spread throughout the older portions of the city. On the map that's on the screen, it shows the locations of these variances. Please keep in mind that many homeowners ask for multiple setback variances. Consequently, we're proposing to revise the setback requirements in the R1B and the R1C only. And these changes reflect the small setbacks that currently exist in the city neighborhoods. These are not in any way changing them. We are just aligning the zoning regulations with what's currently out there. In some cases, I'm going to be honest with you, there are some cases where the existing dwellings are closer than what we're proposing. But after lots of consideration, what we're proposing comes down to what we think might make the most sense. Is a balance between having homes that are 1 foot off the lot line and then having maybe that 5 feet, for example, is a really reasonable number. So we also have a lot of non-conforming lots in the city. Homeowners can build on a non-conforming lot if the new home or the renovation conforms with setbacks or they request a variance and it's granted. So even though we have a situation where the zoning regulations for both lot size, lot width, and setbacks really doesn't reflect the existing conditions, and that happened truthfully because when the zoning standards were placed on top of it, no one did this analysis. No one realized that they were creating districts with lots that were too small, lot standards that were larger than what the existing lots were. Just no one really thought about it. And you're not alone in that. That happened all over the country. Where someone said, hey, someone else has this lot standard, let's just import it, without realizing that your lots are small. And to combat that, at some point in time, the zoning ordinance says you have a non-conforming lot, you can build on it. However, you still can't meet setback standards in these situations. So here we are. So all we're attempting to do is really and truly start to align to a certain degree the zoning regulations of what's currently on the ground. So what I want to do is take just a few minutes to clarify what a setback is, as you can see on the screen. For clarity, a minimum setback is the distance a building has to be from the lot line. And what you see on the screen, the dotted line, that's the setback line, and that's the minimum distance. So every zoning ordinance in the country uses the term minimum setback or minimum or something like that, and prescribes or regulates how far the dwelling of the building has to be from the lot line. So as I said, many existing lots lack sufficient width and depth to accommodate the required setbacks that are currently in your zoning ordinance. As I said, those were all enacted prior to the zoning regulations. These lots were all created prior to the zoning regulations being created. And then to better reflect the prevailing development patterns, we recommend changes shown on the screen in the R1B and the R1C only. In those two districts, we're recommending reducing the minimum setback to 5 feet with a combined minimum setback of 14 feet. And as I said, we are not going to remove all of the variances. My estimates are probably about 25% of them. Because again, as I was looking back at the records, there's plenty of cases where you have homes in 2 or 3 feet off the lot line. But again, if you feel like if you're that close to the lot line, and in this conversation, you probably should go for adjustment, as opposed to being done by that on the lot issues. So So do you have any concerns with 5 feet, 14 feet, or any other development standards that you see this with?
Kevin and Mark, doesn't that align with building code that you get closer to 5 feet, then you're talking about walls?
That was partially why we chose the 5 foot, but also just the idea of closer than that is just feels tight. You know, I think just, it's a good number to kind of settle on.
Excuse me.
You can't hear me?
Oh, we can hear you, Kevin.
My voice projects, I know.
And we
I-
appreciate that.
Donna.
I think it's the nature of the
Why don't you
Yeah,
guys
the
come up to the
microphone.
Yeah, come on up to the front, Lenny.
Oh, it's the microphone. It's really.
And
The front of speakers, it's just, a lot of this is the noise from those from the heating. Try to come up closer is better.
but if people look at something on the map, which we've got this, which they don't have, they're no longer saying it's just odd not to say, well, if you see there.
It's a tough situation. Everybody move up.
It is tough, Tim, because we don't even understand what's being said. Is this? It's-
Take off the readers.
We turn on the light.
I'm just going to put this up a little further.
Please.
Kevin, I think that'll help a lot, because it's muffling back behind.
Exactly. I didn't even get excuse for there.
Right here.
All will be better when we get to the building.
That's a
Any
little
of that
better.
help?
A little better.
I think what's happening is you're turning the location right into that.
There we go. See if that.
All right, let's see if that helps. Okay, so we were talking about this change to the setbacks.
Is that better?
Is that better? Okay. Any concerns with these proposed changes, either to those changes that you see here or the additional development standards that are on the chart?
The minimum gross square area is the same as it is now.
Right, we added that as a result of the phase 1 discussion, and the minimum gross area per dwelling unit is the same as what you've seen previously.
The only question I had about the minimum height of the maximum height of the accessory building, if we have an accessory dwelling unit and it's 15 feet, essentially that would include a combination garage living unit properly, or above and below.
So, we've talked about not allowing any detached accessory dwelling units. And if it's attached to the home, then it's still considered a part of the principal dwelling.
So we are not going to allow detached accessory dwelling units.
That was the discussion we had previously. We can again have that discussion when we get to the regulations applicable to all districts, which is, I think, in March. And that height for the maximum height of accessory buildings is what you currently have. What you see change is in bold and underlined. So the community plan discusses the problems associated with improving the homes on the non-conforming lots sandwiched between Hagedorn Lane, Windley Avenue, Miller Lane, and North Shaw Lane. These lots are so narrow and deficient in lot area that even with the proposed zoning changes that we just talked about, any proposed additions will require a variance. Therefore, we have recommended creating this new residential zoning district called the R1 CBD. The western portion of the neighborhood has the smallest lots, and the eastern portion of the neighborhood has wider lots. In the portion of the block closest to downtown, the narrowest lot is about 40 feet wide, and most of the lots in the eastern portion of the block are between 45 to 50 feet, And then all the lots on the eastern portion are 75 feet deep. Most lots on the western side are about 3,400 square feet to 3,900 square feet. And then on the eastern end, the lots vary from about 5,600 square feet to 11,000 square feet. So the questions to consider are, for the new R1 CBD, should the new district cover the entire block, even though those on the eastern end are larger? Or would you like to have sub-districts within the R1 CBD, where you have a sub-district on the western end for those that are the more narrow, and then a different sub-district on the eastern end to accommodate still very small lot sizes, but aren't as narrow in terms of lot width. So again, we're talking about the R1 CBD, and whether or not we should just have one district, or perhaps sub-districts within it.
Is there a negative to having it all one district?
So one of the concerns that we've heard is that with such a small lot area, and what's being proposed in terms of lot area for this district is 3,400 square feet, potentially someone could tear down several dwellings, replat it, and instead of having 2 homes, you would end up with 3 homes. And so that was the concern with having the whole lot have this one lot area standard. You know, as I said, on the western end, I mean, some of these lots are as small as 3,400 square feet.
And what is the problem you're trying to fix right now?
So right now, all of them are non-conforming. All of them are they're not very deep. They're only 75 feet deep. And so they really and truly, even with all the changes we just talked about to the setbacks, are never going to be able to add on to their home. So again, this is just allowing them to have the opportunity to easily invest in their home, or easier invest in their home. We don't have to fix this problem. But it is, I mean, you will notice that, for example, the R1C, the minimum lot size is 7,000 square feet. The lots in this neighborhood, on the high end, you know, they range from 3,400 square feet to 5,600 square feet, and then the ones on the extreme eastern end, that front on Shaw Lane, are up to 11,000 square feet. But all the ones on the western side are just tiny. So we're totally not even recognizing currently the nature of this neighborhood within our zoning districts.
I think the last thing we want to do is stop people from being able to improve their homes. But if it does fall into 2 neat districts of different sizes that would be relatively easy to define, then I don't have a problem. 2 districts or a sub-district.
I mean, it really is amazing when you start looking at it, that change at about, where it says 72 and 73. Suddenly, you have very different character on the western and on the eastern.
I think it was one of the council people that expressed the concern about tearing it down.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, they have built and improved this anyhow, so if that was their concern, we probably should follow.
And we can easily do that. All right.
So, just out of curiosity, so how are you going to designate the 2 districts to differentiate?
We can do R1 CBD1 and R1 CBD2. I mean, we can, the nomenclature is really not important. What's important is the idea that A, we want to create the district to recognize this very individual neighborhood, and 2, that we want to continue to recognize even further and recognize that there is a different characterization on the western end versus the eastern.
And they would all be sub-districts of the CBD, correct?
Correct, of the R1 CBD. And we chose that name, and that name is just somewhat arbitrary because it is adjacent to the CBD.
I was just wondering, since we're doing it in this particular location, are there any other locations adjacent to the CBD that would warrant a similar treatment, I guess?
No, I mean, I looked at the map very closely, and there's not. I would actually really love to know how this came about.
Midway Court seems like it could be. Those are big enough backyards to avoid this?
So,
They seem pretty packed in there.
they are definitely packed in there. And Midway Court is different in a lot of different ways in terms of its physical constraints. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more with the CBD when we start talking about the CBD district. Okay. And so this is a conversation we really haven't had to date, but it did come up a little bit when we were talking about this before. So right now, currently, and the proposed zoning ordinance requires a minimum front setback, which is either the minimum front setback we just saw on that chart, or it's derived from the average setback of the homes within 300 feet. When a minimum setback is prescribed, it means that a building has to be located at or behind the minimum setback line. But it doesn't mandate where on the lot the home has to go. And recently a home was constructed behind the minimum setback line, and it disrupted the rhythm of the homes on that side of the street. And some of the community members have questioned whether the placement of a new or a renovated home should be more tightly controlled, such as with a maximum setback, which you see on the screen. When a maximum setback is required, buildings have to be located at or behind the minimum setback, but can't be located behind the required maximum setback. So when you have both of those prescribed, the minimum and the maximum, then where a building goes on the lot is much more tightly controlled. So, should there be a maximum setback based on this recent incident that happened? That's the first question. And the next question is, if so, is it just for new homes, whether it's a new home on a lot that exists or it's a tear down and a rebuild, or do we want to deal with home renovations as well? So I'm going to open that up, because we have not had this discussion before, other than to know that there have been some community concerns about homes sitting behind the minimum setback and breaking it.
Is this for all single-family districts?
And this would be for all single-family districts.
I guess I don't have a problem with it in principle. I guess the question I have is not so much for like R1C, where you have a lot of adjacent lots and adjacent living space zones, but when you get into the R1D and the R1AA, where you have large lots, that really the house is dictated more by topography and natural resources and drainage and other items that really dictates the placement of the house. And I would hate to strictly prescribe a setback where that maintenance not makes sense on a particular lot. Where you have adjacent densely developed lots that are basically uniform in size, the dwellings are usually relatively the same mass. I'm not so much concerned about it, but for the large lots I would be.
Right, so perhaps it would just be for R1A, R1B, and R1C. That makes sense. What do y'all think?
Is the front building line that has to be back far, does that include porches and that, or is it the front? Tell me what the front line is really on these.
So as it's currently defined, and tell me if I get this wrong.
I can speak to
Okay.
it really quickly. If it's less than 6 feet or less than 20% of the house width, then it is considered just a small front porch. When it exceeds 6 foot closer to the street and or 20% in the length of the home, then it's essentially the front of the house. So that's the nuance or difference. If somebody wants to put on a 4x4 stoop with a little roof on it, it's not going to be regulated by setback. It's just when it gets to a certain size.
And the reason for that is because then it becomes a part of the home, right? You're measuring to me that it's actually perceived to be a part of the home. And if it is actually ever been enclosed, which is going to happen maybe potentially with something like Kevin was described versus the 4-foot stoop. Right. But I think it does make sense to not worry about the R1D and the R1AA, which are those very large lots that you said are potentially the home placement is going to be prescribed by the environmental factors on the lot.
What's the zone on Newman? Drive, kind of from Highland and make your way, because I know there's been, most of those houses are kind of close to the street, but you had a couple, Schwalbach's house and stuff, and amazing houses, but because the lots are so much bigger than all the rest of them, it makes sense for them not to be probably right up against the street, like much smaller houses. They set them back further, and they've got big driveways and garages and stuff.
Kind of on the right side as you go down the dip and end up kind of the next hill. Is that?
So like
Looks like that's R1B, Frank's coming up.
Here's R1D, which is the undeveloped.
R1B is what is being proposed for trees.
And then R1B all the way down with some two-family.
So that's the one we're talking, that's the type that we're talking about changing it though?
So we're talking about what, A, is it a good idea? I mean, that's the fundamental question, right? I mean, we've never regulated it. We've only had minimum setbacks. And perhaps if this particular example hadn't come up recently, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. So the first question is it a good idea to tightly regulate where someone can put their single-family detached dwelling on their lot? And then if so, we can start talking about where it's appropriate. That's the fundamental question. Do we want to add that additional regulation on single-family detached dwellings in the town?
So traditionally, just from the Board of Adjustment's sake, we have had several folks these days are wanting front porches again. So we've had a lot of folks who want large front porches, and those all have to go to our Board of Adjustment for the most part, because there is generally, in most circumstances, the houses are on a similar plane. And when they want to come out, that's when they need to go before our Board of Adjustment. We currently don't have language about how deep it can go. So somebody could potentially come in and push it back on the lot and have something that's sitting there that is somewhat out of place. And I think the idea is to kind of bring those into some level of performance. Dan, you're right, there are some nuances, obviously. How do we want to regulate those nuances? I'm not sure if we can tweak some language to catch those. The lion's share of our cul-de-sac streets, I guess you would say, in smaller communities do have this issue where, we are getting into a phase over the last few years where we've had a lot more tear down and replacements. And when that happens, somebody can tweak the location of that home, and we want to kind of keep them in that same line. And as a general idea. Are there going to be some nuances? Probably. I don't know if we can tweak some language to accommodate those in some way, but I think as a general idea is kind of what we're looking at.
Is it a good idea? Do we even want to start thinking about it, or we want to say, no, this is too much regulation?
This is totally aesthetic, right? I mean, there's no code issues here. There's no safety issues.
No.
You know.
This is about, there's an expectation on your older streets that when you stand on the sidewalk and you look down, all the houses are on a line, but for the most part.
I just know some architects just like being gross. And I hate this. I mean, if you have an opportunity to do something really cool, I guess I really don't care either way, because it doesn't really have a planning and zoning basis to that.
Well, it has a planning standpoint from an urban design standpoint. There is that expectation that houses are pretty much in a line on the block face.
And what I'm saying, sometimes it's fun to just kind of take the urban fabric and rip it apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And some communities to say this is just too much. Other communities say on certain streets or in certain zones, this is important to us. But this is a topic we haven't discussed before, and it is an additional regulation. Do we want to think about it? And then if we do, let's talk about where we want it and maybe potentially how to handle nuance situations.
Are we, just another question, so our minimum setbacks in general for most of the single family zones, are we, when we were just talking about before about reducing the setback requirements, are we reducing the front setbacks?
No, we're keeping almost the exact same language. There is some tweaking that's happening with projections into required yards, but the front setbacks are staying the same, meaning it's on the chart or derived from the average of all the homes within 300 feet.
If we would do this, would there be like a variance process if somebody wished to appeal the setback requirement?
They could, yeah. If they wanted to be behind the maximum setback, because it is a dimensional variance, they could go to the Board of Adjustment.
I mean, I'm just thinking in an instance, what if there was a large mature tree in front of a house and somebody wanted to preserve the tree, but there wasn't enough room, they push the house back farther, even if it's not aligned with the adjacent structures. You know, there could be instances like that are just kind of a one-off kind of scenario. And I guess the other question I had is, so I think you mentioned before, you know, is over 300 feet is the, I guess, what are you counting for the average? How many adjacent lots?
It's 300, your current code says 300 feet,
feet.
all the homes within 300 feet.
I mean, in my mind, maybe we don't do it by a strict distance, and it's more of
So what?
3 adjacent lots or something like
Well,
that.
what would be the easiest thing to do, frankly, is to say it is the average or within X number of feet of it. You know, maybe we can figure out what X is. Is it 3 feet or is it 5 feet? But, you know, we're not going to take the time to go through every single solitary neighborhood and figure out this maximum. We're going to say,
Right.
you know, either the minimum setback or the average are within 3 feet or 5 feet of it, so that there's a little bit of wiggle room.
So right now, the ordinance says it should line up.
It says nothing. All
I
it
thought
says.
Did
all
it say should, Kevin?
No.
I'm sorry?
I thought it said it should line up with the adjacent houses, but not it had to in the ordinance.
I'd have to go back and revisit the language. I don't know the precise language. I just know that we've had some issues, and we want to just clean those up and try to keep more of a line. You know, I think the precise language we can dabble with. This is a concept or an idea. I know that it was always a minimum, and it didn't really regulate the maximum, that somebody could just go and set something significantly far back. And I think that's what we wanted to kind of zero in on.
How would this be reflected on lake lots?
It wouldn't even apply.
I think it would be clean if you did it.
You think it would be?
Yes, yeah.
I think it's most important if there's one down Johnson, they're taking that one house and raising it to a second floor. What I'm talking about, crossing Johnson a little farther down. Took a house, basically took everything off of it, even the four walls, and going up another level. I think it's important if you're doing a change in the neighborhood exists, that you keep it like the neighborhood you're just seeing it, as opposed to allowing it to go farther back. I know in Newman Avenue, as you go down the dip, there's a house that sits way back in there. Remember that? Yeah. It's back way in there, but it's a little bit, it doesn't make as big a deal because the next one down sits back also. And it's been there a long time. But that house is kind of strange that it's that far back versus the one closest to Elm Avenue. So I think it's the character in the neighborhood, if it exists already, to try to keep it the same. We don't want them tearing down houses that exist and moving that footprint a bunch. People are used to seeing what they're seeing.
So we generally think it's a good idea, I'm hearing. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So let's take the next step. If you're talking about existing neighborhoods, definitely R1B, R1C. True? That's what you have in and around downtown, for example. And the question in my mind is R1A. I need to look at the map and see.
I think, you know, as Dave stated, the R1A obviously has a larger footprint. Those are generally, the R1AA and the R1A generally are a little more separated. Off the top of my head, I don't have the precise location of all those, but there is a general.
So just to give you a frame of reference, for the R1C, the minimum lot area is 7,000. For the R1B, it's 7,500. So those are your smaller district, your smaller lot sizes. And then R1A jumps to 9,500. So I definitely don't think we want to do R1D and R1AA. But I need to look at where the R1A is on the map and see.
I mean, I think in general, I think it's something we probably want to discuss more. Is it something we can bring back
Sure.
at a future meeting and discuss it further? I think.
So
And I guess I'd be interested in just what is that range between the minimum and maximum? I mean, are we talking 10 feet? Are we talking 50 feet? What are we talking?
All right, so we generally think it's a good idea, R1B, R1C. So for the next meeting, let me come up with some language, and we'll think about that a little bit. I'll evaluate R1A and see if we want to think that that's a good idea as well. Nothing, I mean, we're in phase 2 of this process. There's nothing set in stone yet. So let's kick it around a
I mean,
little
with
bit.
your proposal, if I was trying to build a house and that was behind that, and I could come to the Board of Adjustment and say, well, the reason why I think I should be allowed to do this is because my lot is 3 times as big as everybody else's, there's some allowance for some,
Yeah, you could do that, or as Dave said, a large tree in the front yard, or, whatever else. And that would be an argument for the Board of Adjustment to hear. But yeah, let's think a little bit more about the R1A, think about the languages, and bring that back. But generally, it's something that you want to explore. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. And at this time, if it's okay with Dan, we can open it up for community comments and questions and concerns.
You signed in?
Yes, I did.
Could you repeat your name and
I will. Can you hear me? No, it's not the mic isn't on.
Is it on now?
There you go.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sharon MacKnight, 62 Miller Lane. And I'm sorry, at the very beginning of the meeting, I didn't hear it quite right. You're going to have the discussion about this tomorrow between 10 in the morning and 12 in the afternoon for the community. Is that correct? Because I didn't say anything like that on the agenda, so, and to me, I think it would be better if you could have it more like at 6:30 at night with more advance notice for the public, because I live in this area, and I would love to sit down with fellow people that live with me and discuss this with you better and understand it better. But the information, because I try to keep up with it, I had no idea you guys were going to be talking about it tomorrow, so I won't be there.
I think it was on the calendar.
I did not see that anywhere on the calendar, and I checked it.
I saw it on the calendar.
On the calendar that there's going to be a follow-up at the coffee shop between 10 a.m. and 12 in the
On the
afternoon.
website, the city's website. You go to the calendar, it's on it.
I didn't see that. I didn't either, and I just pulled it up today, Tim. And this interests me, so if we could, the public could have better notice on that at a better time, that's better for more of the community, because you'll get more of the input that you want from us that live in this area. I think that would be, I don't know who I tell that to. Who decided this time?
So truthfully, we're piloting it tomorrow, and I apologize that you weren't told.
No, I was not. I'm sorry.
As it's scheduled right now, it's from 10 to 12 tomorrow at Fort Thomas Coffee, and we can talk about what the time is.
No, it's not on there. Sorry. She showed me it's not on there. I know. I got it. So you're not going to have anybody there, so that's kind of hard. I mean, who's going to be there? Just you?
Well, hopefully,
I mean, I would be there, but I can't.
I would just ask, when you ask a question,
I'm sorry.
let an answer come in.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So we're piloting it. If tomorrow's time doesn't work well, we can certainly think about changing the time. But again, it's just an opportunity for community members to come in, ask questions, talk, and in a sort of a less formal environment, as opposed to what we're trying to do here in this room with high ceilings and bad sound.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, and I do better when it's informal, but I just did not know, and I honestly try to keep up. So if there's any way, I don't know Kevin or who decides these times, but if we could do it and have it enough time ahead of time so we can make these meetings, that would be great.
we can certainly talk about it internally and see if we can, obviously we got to work with Lisa's schedule as well.
Yes.
So we can certainly talk about that internally and see what we can do there.
Yeah, because these are our neighborhoods, so that would be greatly appreciated.
Are you also saying, Lisa, though, that it's going to be, this is not the only time?
No, this is not the only time. We will do it every Thursday following this meeting. The idea being, come here, hear what it's all about, and then we can go talk about it tomorrow.
Okay, so every Thursday after tonight, you're doing it?
Every Thursday after the planning commission. And we will talk about what the time.
Just the one Thursday after the plan, thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
it's just the Thursday afterwards.
Just that one time. Okay, it's not every.
Third Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thursday.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the time.
Okay, thank you. That would be great, really. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand that because I couldn't hear it, but that would help a lot. And if it could be put on the agenda clearly that the follow-up, casual talk will be the following day,
Right.
with the times on it and location.
So what time would work better for you?
Oh my God, well, if you're gonna ask me, I think around 6:30 PM at night would work good.
Okay.
Same time here, 6:30 or 7.
Okay.
But you know, you'd have to ask everybody else. I'm just one person. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Anita Pencil, 35 Bonnie Lane. And I'm just a little confused on a couple things, and because of not being able to hear some of it. On Lumley, for instance, Miller and Lumley, when you had the small little lots, and you kind of alluded to something like, say for instance, if someone took 3 of the houses down, they could put two bigger houses or something like that. And yet there was another discussion about you can't put any more multifamily stuff or two-family type. So I want to make sure I understand where all those little lots are. Somebody could actually buy up a few of them and then combine 2 lots and make it 2 houses instead of 4 houses. But they can't put any more 2 or more family homes in that section with all these proposed changes?
Okay, so let's take it a step at a time. So in terms of use, and that's what a two-family is a use, what the Planning Commission was discussing is whether or not to first make the ones that are currently there conforming. When it becomes conforming, that means someone can expand or add on to their home, or 2, allow more. And what the Planning Commission felt was appropriate was just to legitimize the ones that currently exist. And so it's two-family, not multifamily, and it's just the ones that currently exist. No new ones could happen. So there are no new 2 families that could go on any of these streets.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to make, because I know in previous discussions, that's one, like the stretch across from the city building. That has been brought up several times about making big structures again, stuff. The other thing is when it comes to the front porch area, I have almost equivalent to a covered stoop. I can maybe put 2 chairs if I'm careful. So I really don't have a porch to sit on like the bungalows and all that kind of stuff. They have huge porches. If I were to want to put a porch on my house bigger, do I have to go through bunches of hoops to be able to do that? Or are you saying you can do it, or would that be something I would take as normal procedure right now? As long as I'm not taking it out to the street or something like that, I'd have to go to Board of Adjustments or whatever, and say, this is what I want to do. Can I do it?
So it's going to depend on where you live and where your house is placed on the lot. So,
I am actually set back a little bit from where a newer house had been built on either side. So if I even came out a little bit, not huge footage, I could bring it out and still not be beyond where those other houses were put.
then probably you would be able to add a covered porch. But again, that would be a very individual circumstance, and we would have to know where you live and where your house is placed on the lot.
But it's not a definite no. It's something I would be able to present to somewhere, just like the house with the big tree in the front yard. I could come to somewhere and say, this is what I propose I can do. Can I get the permission to do it then?
So if it meets the standards, you would just do a building permit, and Kevin and Mark would issue that and you do your business.
Okay.
But if it doesn't meet the zoning ordinance, then you would have to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for permission.
And then one more thing was when the statement was about the freestanding structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Currently, I have a shelter and a spring house. I don't have a shed or building structure. Would I be able to do an actual shed and maybe a shed that's a 2-story type shed in my backyard, as long as it is away from all the footage allotments, the side footage and all that kind of stuff? Am I able to do that? Because some of the comments were I think you said something about a structure. Are you taking garage and an apartment above, or are you just talking structures?
That's what I was referring to in my particular question, was whether, because we were limiting the height of an accessory building. So if you had a shed, essentially, you couldn't be taller than 15 feet. And what my question was, if we were going to, one of the other topics we talked about last year was this accessory dwelling unit. So if you wanted to have an elderly parent or a child or something that wasn't technically in your house but living on your property, could they live in an addition or even in a separate garage?
Kind of like a granny pod?
Yeah,
or,
like the ponds, over in the garage.
Yeah, exactly.
Something.
So that's
what I was referring to specifically, so.
And that's what I'm asking about too, because what if I want to turn my shelter into an actual shed?
Something where somebody can live in.
If I wanted to, or the upstairs could be like, when I was a kid, a family member had a barn. It was a shed, but we camped out on the loft area.
So that's we're going to discuss that.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to know is, am I going to be permitted to do that? Would that be an exception to the rule? Or is that something that we just...
We haven't decided yet.
Okay, so you kind of get where I'm going, because I'm to the age of granny pods.
and that's what we're going to discuss.
Okay, so I want to make sure we're still on that good path. Okay, I'll go back.
But what we're talking about here is if your maximum height of your accessory building, your shed, or whatever it is, could only be 50 feet. Right now.
So would there ever be an exception to that?
Well, that's something we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Well, you can always, for dimensional variance, you can always ask the Board of Adjustment
Right.
for a greater height. But the height for detached accessory structures today is 15 feet, which is your shed, all of those kinds of things.
So the accessory to the loft would be about in that dimension, would it, or is that?
It could be taller. It wouldn't be shorter than that.
It would not be shorter than that. But the idea of an accessory dwelling unit, meaning that you would have the ability to somehow live in your shed, will be a topic that we'll cover, I think, in March.
Okay. And then to clarify on that Thursdays following, it's at what time?
It's at 10 to 12 at Fort Thomas Coffee, starting tomorrow.
My input, currently, I probably would be available for that, but when I'm working, that's for the working community that doesn't have the freedom of, hey, I'm going to go take lunch at the coffee house. That doesn't work for the common good of the whole community. So that's my input.
Okay.
And evenings make it a little easier for those of us that don't work nights. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hillary Landwehr, 47 Woodland Place. Clarification on the term that got swallowed up. You were talking about the maximum setbacks from, the minimum and the maximum setback. And you said that when the building was set too far back, it disturbed something that got swallowed up.
It disturbs the rhythm of the street or the plane. So when we talk about the plane is if you stand on the sidewalk and you're looking down the street, the front of the home or the front of the covered porch establishes the plane where all the homes reside.
Okay, no, I thought maybe you were concerned about what was happening in the back. Okay. Okay, you took care of one question I had. But the other one I had, okay, I live on a non-conforming lot on Woodland Place. I suspect there are more than one non-conforming lots on Woodland and Mayfield and places like that. So if lightning struck my house and it burned down and I had to rebuild, will I be able to rebuild?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. My cat will not tolerate anything less. All right.
Yes, because at some point the zoning ordinance, people who drafted the zoning ordinance and amended it realized that a good portion of all of your lots are non-conforming.
I was going to say, I was told when I moved here that your house should never have been built. Too late.
Yeah, it's there.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Joan Ferris. I'm going to wait for correction on this if I'm wrong, and I'm always willing to accept my errors. But from the very beginning of tonight, I've been discouraged because we were told, if I'm not mistaken, that absolutely no discussion of rezoning would take place. It was put on hold until February 20 of 2023. Am I mistaken? Was that not stated at City Council by the mayor and the city manager?
My recollection was 2023. I don't recall February. If that was said and I missed it, then it's possible. But all along, my understanding was always in 2023, once we had a new council.
I don't know if the new council has
Hang
been...
on. This process would begin. Go ahead.
I'm not certain the new council has been sworn in yet. They very well may have been,
But we've got a new council.
but they're not sworn in. So the old is still existing.
Go ahead.
Okay, you got the last word on that one.
All right.
At that same time, if it didn't start until January, and we're January 18th, this is one heck of a lot of work to be done in 17 days. I've seen some really high-performing people that could not have done this much work from last October or November in 2 weeks' time. My comment. Okay, my second one is, and this sort of carries over a little bit from City Council as well. There seems to be like a surprise that 172 requests for variances were made over 5 years. And they said it's cumbersome, and if we just eliminate these variance requirements, people won't have to request them. Won't it be easier? Yeah, it will. But if you do the math over 5 years, that's 3 per month. Now, I can't imagine if most of these variances are, I kind of want to put a front porch on, it's going to be 7 feet, it should really only be 6 feet, that it's going to take more than 10 minutes. So 1/2 hour a month for the Board of Adjustments seems pretty minor. I realize it's a volunteer job. Everybody out here is volunteering and doing more than a half an hour a month. I absolutely can guarantee you that. The variances, or the need for variances, the sets that have been made for which a variance request would be needed, were put there for a purpose. So eliminating them for essentially 1/2 hour a month to cover these over 5 years, if the variance or the setting against which they want to fudge it or tweak it a little bit, and I understand that there's good reasons for that, but they were set there for a reason. As you mentioned, the rhythm of the street, the look of it as you go up or down or however, were put there for, I would assume, a very good reason. So for a half an hour a month to just say, we no longer care about that, you don't need to go to the Board of Adjustments, seems lazy. I don't know if that's the word, perhaps it's not, but why were they there in the first place? I can tell you, I live on Burning Lane. It's really kind of an odd thing. It's a very straight street, although it's like that because it's a through street. But I live 6 houses down from my daughter, same side of the street. I can stand on my little front porch. She can stand on her little front porch. I can't see who's going into her house. I can't see who's going out because of the straightness of the street. If suddenly big porches were on, that would sort of remove that. It would just sort of change what we're used to. I mean, I can see across the street who's coming or going, but it would seem a pretty big deal. And when they put the little blue paper with the notice saying they're going to the Board of Adjustments, you know if somebody's trying to add a 12-foot porch on the front or a pool in the back or whatever the different things are that need them. So it seems to me that if the reason for needing a variance were put in place, I don't know why we're just saying, we don't really want to do with that paperwork because it's just so minor. And oddly, when I lived up the street, I just moved down the street about maybe 4 years ago when my daughter moved in, someone put a shed next door to me. I was infirmed at the time, not able to walk, not able to get out of the chair. And it went up during those days and was like on close to our property line. So I called the city And they said, well, it's not allowed to be. So they came out and they looked at it and they said, you're right, but it's up, there's nothing you can do, but you can sue the guy. Why don't sue my neighbors? They didn't make him, they made him get a building permit because he hadn't had one, and there it sits still. So it cost me several $1,000s to put bushes in between the 2 yards, but I don't think I should be the one who should have to go to court. Another story. My third point is about this meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. What concerns me, but troubles me greatly, is we'll get out of here 8:39 maybe. We don't have handouts of any of this. I haven't seen them online. If it is, I don't know. I couldn't find the agenda today. I found it last week. But today I could have gotten it. I heard from Facebook, not on fortthomas.org. We don't have these. Sharon mentioned that she thinks her neighbors would be concerned. I think a lot of people in the city would be concerned. I think to leave a meeting at, I'll say 8 o'clock, because I know it'll be later than that, and expect people to be informed of what we are seeing for the first time, don't have a handout up, to go and give our opinion at 10 o'clock is really unfair. I don't think making it 6:30 makes it much more fair. One day to gather people whose property values, whose way of life, whose heart, for lack of a better word, of the city in which they grew up, would get changed forever. You better be there by 10 tomorrow. I can't interpret that. My interpretation is my interpretation. Does not have to be accepted. Sure seems like they don't want anybody to know about this. And that has been a concern for a long time. The fact that it wasn't to be discussed, although Tim is trying to tell me that this was, it was all put on hold. And then, I don't think it's fair that we don't get handouts. My simple question in the beginning was, I wasn't sure what you were talking about. You said Pinnacle. Well, that's my question. It's like, well, we're doing these lots and then these lots. It's like, where? We're at a huge disadvantage. I realize we're not on the board. I realize some people have offered to be on the board and we're not accepted or encouraged or nominated or whatever it is you have to be. But I don't like the word fight. I think we're trying to become educated. A lot of us who have lived here for the 70 years have lost confidence in the goals. In fact, something that you said a little bit earlier, well, our goal, we think, is this. I didn't know we had a goal. What is the goal? Is the goal to make these changes? Or to hear if we need changes? It seems late in the game to say, do we need them? Because there's an awful lot of resistance from people who do not think these changes, all of them, need to be made. But once you say that's our goal, where has that goal been stated? I'm just curious about it.
So we have a comprehensive plan that was done a few years ago.
4.5.
That many folks had a significant input on, and a lot of these things were discussed. As far as your ability to be informed, we have an evening meeting where you can voice your concerns as you are today, and we have a morning meeting tomorrow. So we have tried to hit both of those time frames. This is exactly why you're informed. We have, obviously these aren't set in stone. None of these decisions are set in stone tonight. There's multi-months of work that are going to be involved in this. So we have many opportunities to come and voice your concerns. And we are putting it out there as best we can. I don't know what else we can do other than drop it on your porch. But we have obviously done that. It's on the website. It's everywhere.
I don't believe this is.
It is on the website. It's the same spot. It was put on there Friday because we have to evaluate from discussions, and this was put on there Friday.
Could you tell me the agenda items? Because I looked all over for things.
If you go under news, where it was before, we've had these discussions, Joan. Where it was before, it's in the same spot. Go under news and go under zoning code update. It's there.
This presentation?
This presentation is there.
So when I saw a zoning code update and I pulled it up today, it was 55 pages. Is this 55 pages?
We might not be touching every single page today, but that is the document for which we're discussing tonight.
Okay, I'm going to mention another thing. I believe it is a totally unrealistic expectation that we have to print out 55 pages or look at a screen from a distance and remember exactly what it says.
You can do a public records request. Come on up and
Oh
we'll
my
meet
gosh,
with you.
have you ever? No, I don't do that.
Well, I don't know what you want from us, Joe. What do you want from us?
Handouts, perhaps handouts when we get here.
We're killing trees. These things are pretty thick. We got tree people here in Fort Thomas, so they're going to disagree with you.
And I'm going to intervene for a minute. I agree with Kevin. I've been around other cities. I don't see this type of outreach and trying to get the information. You've made your point. If you've got other things you want to discuss, go ahead. But we do need to get back to this meeting pretty quickly.
I will just say one thing, not about the meetings or the communication, but just in terms of your question, why are we changing the setbacks and some things we talked about this evening. The fact of the matter is the majority of Fort Thomas was built before there was any zoning, period.
And we loved it.
Well, I mean, zoning didn't come into effect.
I understand.
until
I've heard that at other meetings, and
Right,
I
it's
understand.
not come into effect until the 1960s, okay? That original zoning was developed for the state of Kentucky. It was not designed for Fort Thomas or Campbell County or Northern Kentucky for that matter generally. And so the original model zoning ordinance was for the entire state of Kentucky. Over time, and this is the 5th revision of the zoning ordinance that I've been involved in since I've been on planning commission. This isn't the first one we've done since the 1960s. We did it in 1998, 2002, 2005, 2012. This is the latest iteration of that. And what we're trying to do is to mold the zoning ordinance to reflect what's actually in our city. And so we're trying to make it easier on the citizens to some degree, and I understand your concerns, but the intent is why force people to go to the Board of Adjustment if there is really not a legitimate reason for them to do so, in terms of just because that's what the ordinance says. When you were asking, weren't those setbacks put there for a purpose? Yes and no. The original setbacks were model ordinances that were developed nationally that the state of Kentucky adopted. Fort Thomas adopted it based on the Kentucky Area Planning Commission. But nobody actually sat down and said, how does this apply to this subdivision or this street in particular? Nobody ever did that. And gradually over the past 20 years, we've been trying to incrementally zone in on these particular streets, these particular areas like Lumley and Miller, and try to tailor our ordinance to match what's actually physically out there. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
That's fair to say, if you had the perfect ordinance, you wouldn't have a Board of Adjustment. But we're not eliminating the Board of Adjustment, it's still going to exist. Okay?
I realize that, but they're taking, well, 172 reasons to go to them away.
And
Well, I get
that's,
you count on that, but
we really do need to get moving back to our meeting. I think you've made your point. If you've got another point, please make it. But most of these conversations are going to be limited to 5 minutes, well beyond that, Jim. If you've got something else.
No, where is it stated 5 minutes? And this, I have a ticker down here on how many times you tell me to quit talking. And I've got them month by month, and for some reason, I would think it would come from the head of the Board of Zoning, but it doesn't, so.
So we do, our attorney, I mean, we made this sitting out the council, if you do the council, you're limited time to speak.
No, just school board, not on council.
But the other point, I think, is the Thursday meeting is not a meeting to me. It's a gathering, let's call it.
It's a conversation.
There's no minutes to be taken. There's no, because we're not there.
I know, and neither will the people be because they won't know about it.
To me, there's no reason to have a Thursday. Excuse me. It's here. This is when you get your representation. It's at nighttime, so most people can come. It's here. It's happened this way for forever.
And Joan, so you don't think I'm picking at you? Our new public meeting procedure that was filed January 14, 2023, it does mention in paragraph B that we ask that citizens limit their comments to less than 3 minutes to allow others to speak. So 3 to 5 minutes is reasonable. We're going to have more questions in a little bit, but it's time to move on with our meeting.
I'll say one thing about that 3 to 5 minutes, because school board is usually 5 minutes, and they limited it to 2. It was so interesting because on the video, it took them 1 minute and 23 seconds to explain how you can only talk for 2 minutes. So what are you going to say? Yeah, essentially, a half minute. That's unrealistic. The fact that that's been out there for 4 days, seriously, you cannot possibly, I don't know how much I need to read every day to follow the rules in the city that I've lived in for over 70 years. I mean, unbelievable.
I think we're ready to move on to the next section, please.
So based on previous discussions, residential contextual standards were included for the R1A, the R1B, the R1C, the R1 CBD, and the R2 zoning districts, but only for new single-family homes constructed on existing lots of record. Homes like flag lots won't be required to meet these standards, and the reason it's very clear that it's existing lots of record, it's really meant to deal with only established neighborhoods. So any new subdivision would not have to comply with these residential contextual standards. So again, it's talking and thinking about the character of your existing neighborhoods versus new ones. So any new homes and new subdivisions would not be required to do this, even if they're in the R1A, the R1B, or the R1C. So one of the conversations that we had previously, there are 3 topics that are the subject of these residential contextual standards: garages, building orientation, and size and rear facades. And really and truly, it was those front-loaded garages that seemed to be the most concerning when we talked about this previously. What's currently proposed is that the zoning administrator will review new homes for compliance when a building permit is submitted, and any applicant that wishes to deviate from these standards may seek approval from the design review board. And so I want to take a few minutes and just sort of talk about what's in these standards, and then we can talk about the key questions. So in terms of garages, if you have a 50-foot wide lot or less, you cannot have a street-facing garage unless the garage is in the basement, like you see here. And this is a very common situation in Fort Thomas. On lots 50 foot or more, you can have a front-loaded garage, provided it doesn't protrude beyond the front portion of the house, like you see on the top. And it can't occupy more than 50% of the ground level street facade. Street-facing garages have to have at least one of the following design features. They have to have transparent windows, they have to provide a transition, they have to have an overhang or an eave. Again, all of those standards are just meant to break up the look of this garage as it's facing the street. They have to be flanked on either side by some sort of vertical design element. The first floor, the second floor could cantilever over the garage. Garage is set back, or the garage doors are painted a different color scheme. Again, this is all meant, if you do have a front-facing garage, to make it less prominent, so that you don't have in your established neighborhoods new homes that seem to be dominated by garages. So if you had an opportunity to look at these, you will notice that these contextual standards, 3/4 of them are dealing with garages, because that was the main issue. The other main issue we heard during phase 1 was building orientation, meaning that the homes didn't have a front door that faced the street. So there was a standard for that. And then we just have a basic standard for the side and rear facades that say you can't have any blank walls if you can see that from the street. So in terms of key questions, are these contextual standards being applied in the correct districts? R1A, R1B, R1C, and R1 CBD, and single-family homes in R2. Do we have the right zoning districts? Yes, okay. Are we regulating the correct elements of home design? Did I miss anything in terms of what the concerns were about new homes in established neighborhoods?
I guess I had a question you were just mentioning about the blank wall question. What defines what you can see from the street and what you can't see from the street?
That is the only sort of subjective criterion that is in this list. And I looked at it today and I thought, this was a concern that everyone had, that if you're driving down the street, if you can see it, then it's a concern. But it is the only one that is subjective. So, that is going to be your discretion as to what, again, keeping in mind that the zoning administrator and the building inspector are administering these when a building permit is filed. So do you want to give them that discretion?
Well, my concern about that is if you have a south-facing facade, you don't want to have a wall penetration there from the solar gain.
Right.
And so most south-facing walls generally do not have windows.
Correct.
Generally. And if you can see it from the street, then every single one of this is going to be in violation. So that's a question, I guess.
So we can do one of two things. We can either eliminate the requirement, or we can say, excluding south-facing garages, south-facing facades. What do you think?
I don't know if anybody else has a question about that.
I mean, that is literally the most subjective one, saying you can't have a wall devoid of opening so that it's visible from the street. It's somewhat subjective.
So the applicant can always appeal the decision of the zoning administrator for the subjectiveness of that issue for adjustments.
Well, also, what we're putting in here is that if they want to deviate, it would go to the design review commission. So it wouldn't be, or design review board, sorry. It would not be, we have to go to board of adjustment and say there's some sort of reason. We can always go to the DRB. But again, we're trying to keep people from having to go to these boards as much as humanly possible. I personally, I know it was a concern that came up during phase one, would probably recommend getting rid of it and just leaving that we have to have the entrance facing the street. But it was a concern that y'all expressed, so what's your pleasure?
I guess just the other question about the applicability of this, why would not this apply to a new subdivision?
Because we had previous discussions, you were most concerned about your established neighborhoods and suddenly going from a street that is dominated by front porches to suddenly having a garage shoved in the middle of that.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't want 50 garages in a row either.
And that's where this one came from, is a street that looks just like that.
So
Every single solitary house looks just like that.
if we're going to have contextual standards, I think they should probably apply.
It's very much your discretion, what you think is important to your community. Our previous discussions were, if it was a new street, we weren't really worried about it. But if it was in the middle of an established neighborhood, we were concerned. And so that's why the existing lots of record provision was put in. So that's a primary question. Are you only worried about established neighborhoods, or do you want to have these standards for new neighborhoods as well?
Most of the complaints we got were new houses, weren't they?
New houses and established neighborhoods.
Infill lots that,
So I don't think there's any reason to go beyond that, if that's what all of our complaints.
I would generally agree. If we have a new development, obviously it's been approved over on Newman, and I think that, if you go start to restrict that for a new design criteria for a new street would not be necessary there.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think that, there's less impact. I think they're all going to probably be on the same order, in all likelihood, if you're in a new community, and it's being established. But I think if you have an existing street that has some level of design and consistency, and you put a stark difference in there, that's where it's impactful.
I understand that. I guess where I'm getting at is if you're like, I don't know anything about the housing coming up on the new street off of Newman, but what if all those garages on those designs were 50% of the front facade? Do you really want an entire street to look like that? That's my concern. If we're going to make contextual standards for everybody else, I think everybody should live by those contextual standards.
People that buy new houses and have the design don't want to look at that. I mean, that's how we do it in the county is, you know, we got 60 new houses.
We drive up there,
And people just don't want to look, they don't want their house to be the one with the garage. I think that's.
If you're going to restrict the I'm just saying, if you're going to restrict the garage, the size of the garage for relative to the mass of the house, it ought to be the same for all of them.
Why don't we put a pin in it and continue this discussion? And let's think about it more. Think about what's more important to you, whether or not what you want to regulate. Just established neighborhoods, infill, or new subdivisions. Because there are communities, truthfully, that are saying, you know, even though you may want a 3-car garage that dominates your whole front, we don't want our community to look like that from the street. And so they are doing these types of contextual standards. So it's very much a policy decision that y'all can make.
This becomes an issue because people are doing at least 2 cars or 2 drives, 2 doors, even 3 now.
Well, it also becomes an issue on how narrow the lot
You
is.
say these are ones.
Right. So, and that's also why in some of the neighborhoods this is happening more for new homes, right? The lots are narrower, people want a 2 or 3 car attached garage, so the whole front of the house becomes the garage because the lots are 50 feet wide. When the lots get wider, the houses tend to get wider, and therefore the garage doesn't take as much room. And also when you have a wider lot, you can do a side-loaded garage. But when your lots are narrower, and people want an attached garage, you're going to end up like that, like the top.
And that's what I'm saying. I think we should try to prevent to the extent we can. Whether it's a whole brand new street of those types of houses or if it's an infill, to me it's the same thing.
Okay, it's a policy decision. And we can continue this discussion as we move into the next phase, because these are very little words, easy to change. So we have agreement that we want the standards. We have agreement that the garage is our biggest area of concern. And our lack of agreement is it just on existing lots of record, just infill, or does it apply to subdivisions? Am I stating that correctly?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of qualm about the color. There's some of the elements, but we can talk about that as a separate thing. I don't know that I want to dictate the color necessarily.
Well, that you just have to pick. Yeah, you just have to pick one of those. When we originally talked about this, we said you had to have 2 of those things. And you said, no, that's too much. So they just have to pick one. And that really is a laundry list of 7 things that someone can pick to do. It's a fairly long and extensive list. No, I agree with you. If you're not even talking about color, that this is what you have to do. But if you can't do anything, you need the rest of them. You can at least paint. But what I would say to you is that as we're moving down this path, if you do have concerns about wording or those kinds of things, jot it down and email it to me. And then we can start dealing with that as we move into phase 3. We're more worried about the wording as opposed to the policy. Does that make sense? All right, Central Business District, completely changed what we're talking about. So previously, we really didn't talk about the Central Business District because we were talking about, we were considering doing a different type of zoning in our Central Business Districts. So now we need to back up and talk about the Central Business District, which will be retained. So currently, Midway, where we're sitting, and downtown are zoned Central Business District. We propose for the district regulations and the uses to remain similar to what they are today, but there are some policy discussion questions that were outlined in your memo that we need to think about. And if you want to think about this is similar to those discussions we had in phase 1, where we were thinking at a higher level and trying to make some decisions. Once we make these decisions, we will draft a revised Central Business District and bring them to you. So, let's talk about the prohibition on residential uses on the first floor. So right now, in both Midway and downtown, it is prohibited to have residential uses on the first floor. What I was told is that that was put in place a number of years ago to prevent conversions of tenant spaces to look like this. And so it was very much a concern of creating this dead space in the middle of a retail district. And so that's why it was put in place a number of years ago. So the question to you is, do we keep that prohibition? What I would say to you is that as the nature of retail and non-residential uses are changing, having that as a requirement along all of the district in both Midway and downtown is prohibitive. It's going to make it very difficult for those buildings to be used over time. And so what I would suggest to you in downtown is that you only keep that prohibition against residential uses in the locations that you see on the map. So it's essentially where One Highland is, what's across the street, and then down to the city building in downtown. So at those locations only, you would be required to have a non-residential use on the first floor, as opposed to all of downtown. So the question to you is, are you comfortable doing away with that prohibition and only having it in those locations? Or are you comfortable doing away with it and suggesting a different location? Come on, guys, talk.
Well, nothing changes with the existing structures. We've got some two families across from the 115, 111, that area right there. If your proposal, what you suggest is, or what you're proposing is allowed to happen, does that mean they could become two-family houses again? Or something sitting on the first floor in our business?
Correct. Correct. Well, let's take that back a step. So right now, those are single-family homes. Some of them have businesses on the first floor and dwelling units on the second floor. So if this happens like this, yes, if you decide to do so, you could allow it to be a two-family use, in which case someone could come back on the first floor. One of our other policy questions is whether or not to allow single-family detached dwellings as a permitted use, in which case it could then become that as well. But yes, theoretically, you could then have a residential use on the first floor and it could become a two-family, if you decide you want a two-family. The key policy question at this point is, do you only want, do you want to get rid of that prohibition in order to then hopefully facilitate some additional uses over time? And is this the appropriate location?
So from the comprehensive plan, didn't that say all of the CBD would be no residents on the first floor? How do we fit in with that?
Yeah, but it really did talk about that. I mean, it really did say keep that prohibition in place in order to create this mixed-use, walkable, vibrant downtown. But that was 4.5 years ago, pre-COVID. And so many communities are doing away with that restriction right now in order to allow some additional uses in their downtown. And there are some people who are saying just do away with it completely. I'm not going to go there with you. But I do think it might be appropriate to start thinking about these types of locations.
I think the developer at One Highland said he would have built commercial on the first floor if he could have built a totally residential building. So the question is, do we want a commercial center of town? Do we actually want a commercial business district in the middle of town? Or are we okay with the whole thing possibly going single-family residential? I mean, that's kind of where I think the question is. I personally think it's kind of neat what's happening at the Midway, and the fact that One Highland seems to be doing okay with the commercial on the first floor, and it is nice to have a place to shop and all that in town.
And that's really why I did not say get rid of it completely, which many communities are doing. So what this will leave in place is One Highland, and essentially where you have all of your non-residential uses right now. But Dan is correct. Basically, from Because that, on the other side of what was the bank, onward, that prohibition would be gone.
Do you have a wider shot that shows the whole central business district? What we would all be excluding then if we would limit it just to these?
I don't think I do.
In your packet, on the third to last page, or the fourth to last page, shows that.
Is 33 the Shown building?
Yes.
That's the building on the other side of what was formerly the bank and what would be, yeah. So what you're giving up, is the bank building, all of that. But, fundamentally, if you want to keep it in place in downtown, you just keep it in place.
There were two goals in the comprehensive plan. One was to have a more vibrant commercial center, and the other was to increase the kinds of housing. So, it's those two kind of conflict here. I don't really know what's best, so I kind of stick with the recommendation here to keep prohibition, at least in some of that area, of residential on the first floor, at least in some areas.
Personally, I like the businesses on the first floor and the residential on the second, if it's a central business district. And I think I've heard that these businesses feed off each other.
They do.
They have, so we want to have as many of those as we can have on the first floor.
Okay.
And I think if you remove the prohibition, when you lose places to a residence, they're not coming back, I don't believe, as a business. That once they're going to change, you're going to be stuck with that. And I think you're going to be squeezing out the business district. Personally, I'm in favor of keeping the prohibition, but
I just think they're limiting. For example, let's take, and what's not on here, and I apologize, probably should have been, is the strip mall that's behind the plaza. Like, let me see 14 back here. That's part of the central business district. There has been some conversations about it becoming, a multifamily. Do you really want, or do you want to require residential, the retail on the first floor there? Maybe the compromise is, if it's on the avenue, it has to have some sort of non-residential use on the first floor. Or the whole district.
if we leave the prohibition, somebody still has the ability to come in and have their property rezoned if they can show that, for instance, at the strip center, we've had people coming in before asking for a change in the zoning on their property. And that would still be applicable, I would imagine, for...
Yeah, they could come in and ask for an R3, for example, on that parcel. So what I'm hearing is that, even though you may be restricting the redevelopment of these properties or even the use of these properties, by keeping this restriction in place, you want to keep it. Okay?
If we're going to try to get like Bellevue that has a large business strip, we don't have that right now.
You don't, and truthfully, you're not going to get it. You do not have the population density in and around downtown to get much more retail than you have. You're just not going to get it.
Well, if it was around Miller's Lane and that whole central area there, which is behind the tower, if you would, the clock tower, that's the central business district to me when I think about central business district.
Well,
Someday I'd like to see it be like that. It has the parking behind the show and all that to support it, I think.
It has parking, but you don't have people. You don't have a
Well,
density enough people.
more business and where we go in. People in Bellevue don't all live in Bellevue. We go down there and we don't live there. And I'm hoping that other people would come to us because we have something they want.
I'm sorry, Cal?
I think Bellevue's more easier to access than Fort Thomas.
It is.
Fort Thomas is harder to get into and get out of when you bring all the people in.
I think, this is your discretion, but I think you need to think seriously about, given the changing nature of retail, And how many of us ordered from Amazon in the last month, for example? You know, you're not going to get those non-residential uses that might have been possible pre-COVID. You're not going to get office uses. So, but if this is something you're not comfortable changing, we'll leave it in place. But I'm just going to plant the seed that maybe you think differently. And if you want non-residential development, because of your difficult access and all of that, you're going to have a population base in and around downtown that you don't have. Or you're going to have something so wonderful that people are going to drive from Newport and Bellevue and all of those places. So. All right, Midway. So what I've heard is you want to keep the prohibition in Midway as well?
Yes.
Yes? All right, let's keep moving. Okay. So according to the current provisions of the Central Business District, single-family detached dwellings are not a permitted use. As a result, the homes currently used as dwellings are non-conforming uses. And we talked earlier about what that is. A non-conforming use is created when a zoning provision is adopted or amended to prohibit a particular use that was lawfully established. And as I said, the Fort Thomas zoning ordinance does not permit a non-conforming use to be reestablished, right? So, for example, any of these homes that have been converted on the first floor to a business can never go back to a single-family home. We heard previously in these discussions that that was problematic for some of our community members, that they wanted to allow single-family detached dwellings as a permitted use in downtown. So as we're starting to think about the use list in the Central Business District, what do y'all think about allowing single-family detached dwellings as a permitted use?
To me, it makes more sense if you're going to call the Central Business District that it should be business district. And if these houses can't survive with businesses in them, then they shouldn't be in the Central Business District. Consider changing the zone.
We can do that.
And is what you're saying, you know, shrink the Central Business District to exclude some of the homes, or?
Yeah,
That's what you want to do.
I personally think it's fine with the, you know, we don't ever seem to have a problem with filling those first floors with offices. Now, I agree that retail is probably a stretch in some of those, but I think office is a good transition from residential to mixed use, like offices and residential, and then heavier use as you get right to the middle of town. But it doesn't seem appropriate to me to have single-family houses in a central business district.
It's not uncommon.
Is it?
It's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon and they're not conforming, or they're conforming and they're allowed.
There's a mixture of both, right? I mean, but many communities will say, over time, they can become offices, they can continue to be single-family detached dwellings, they can be all of these things. But we have some options, right? We can make it a permitted use, completely. We can say if the home exists the day the ordinance is passed, it's a permitted use. We can rezone it to something else. But I think, especially when we're talking about the community plan, if you want your downtown to become something else in the next 50 years, more intense, then you leave it in the district. Recognizing that these homes have existed, and do you want to allow them to be single-family homes again?
Now, my big picture is someday two of them may become one. We have a median 1 mile. Business on the floor, and residential, new on the top.
But nothing would preclude that, even if you allowed single-family detached dwellings as a permitted use.
Well, I don't want to see them go back to single family.
Okay.
They're central business.
I mean, I think some of that gets back to the same discussion we had with the single-family residential zones and the setback situation. If you have a commercial building, like one Highland or something similar to that, even if it's a smaller scale and it's zero setback, you don't want somebody coming in and building a single-family residential two-story that has a setback of 30 feet and it's back. You know, I think we're trying to have some uniformity of that street context. I think it goes hand in hand with the same discussion too. If you allow residential on the first floor of these, then it's by de facto conversion, you're making it a single family home. So it's kind of go hand in hand as far as the policy goes, at least in my perspective.
But it can be a little more nuanced, right? You just legitimize the ones that exist today, if you wanted to do that.
But are there any that exist today that are residential?
Yep. That one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are 2 single-family dwellings that are occupied as single-family detached. Both floors, yeah. There are 2. At least 2 that I can think of. And then the rest of the first floor has been converted to office, and then a couple of them have residents on the second floor.
I think years ago, when Central Business lying around there, we was just going away from there.
Okay, so we do not want to allow any single-family detached dwellings as a permitted use. Well, no, we're not talking about new, we're talking about the ones that currently exist today.
I can't say leave there, but I'd like to see it. This is not the first.
Okay.
Economics will tell us. I mean, we didn't think 1 aisle would be 1 aisle.
Is someone in that frame shop anymore? Always frame, is somebody in that one? That building's deteriorating so bad. It's unbelievable. And isn't the one at the other side that is an investment, aren't they moving into one right now? There's one back in there. Yeah, so if you have all businesses on the first floor, where are we getting these businesses to come in? Where are you getting the businesses to come in? Because I know that Bowman frame
If
shop.
you build it, they will come. It's really what you
No, they're not built though.
Or are you going to take away and say we're not going to have a Central Business Center, we're going to have a residential community? That was our other choice.
I was just wondering, because they're sitting there now, I know that frame shop has been vacant for the DV, and that building is deteriorating so bad. And just walk around it, go up in the back. And then, the next one is owned by, yeah, I mean, is he in there? Because that's deteriorating just as well. And then you have the families live in that white one. And then the one, I think 1 or 2 over, that's the investment place, and I think they're moving to one higher. So what's going to happen to that? Wouldn't you rather it be families?
I mean, I think you can just allow the single-family detached dwellings that are there today. It can be considered a transitional use. I mean, we're not precluding the first floor from being an office. We're not in any way precluding them from being torn down and another one finally being built. We're just giving options.
But you're not allowed single family to be permitted.
It would be permitted with restrictions, right? So it had to exist the day the ordinance was passed as that. So no new ones could be built.
Understood. I guess the question is, do we know which ones are residential and which ones are mixed use today? I mean, can you go in and say we need to determine?
No, I'm talking about not the use itself. I'm just talking about the building. So think about a building type versus the use. So yes, feasibly, the frame shop or whatever else could convert back to a single family if someone wanted to.
Because now, are they allowed to now?
No.
No, see, and that's why it's probably still pretty.
But could it be, instead of going to a single family use, could it be a multi-family use?
Sure, we could, I mean, right now you can't have a duplex or a triplex or any of those things.
Oh, we would permit that.
But you could permit it. I mean, that would be one way of adding some gentle density to downtown, but not having a single family dwelling. So we could say that. We could say it could be a two-family.
I mean, to some degree, that makes more sense to me than it does to have a single family. Potentially.
I mean, we're talking about a couple different things here, right? We're talking about use. We're talking about character. Because that's what we heard from many community members, is that those homes have value and they add to the character of downtown, it's difficult sometimes to get offices on the first floor, let's think about allowing them to be used as a single-family detached dwelling. But you're right, I mean, you could do a two-family, we could do a three-family. Those would be residential in character until such time as someone decides to do something else with the property.
We have a lot of stuff tonight. I feel like this is there's a lot of people who are very passionate about these few homes.
Mhm.
And I feel like this might be worth just tabling this and
Okay.
coming back to it.
Yeah, I mean, we have not had these policy level conversations about the central business district because we were talking about doing form-based zoning before. So yeah, we can table it and come back to it. We can put a pen in it.
They're not as
So in Midway, there are existing single-family detached dwellings, but several of them have been converted to two-family, like we were just talking about. So again, I suggested that if a two-family exists today, it be allowed to continue, and it would be a restricted use in the Midway area.
Well, I think we had some discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, last year about these particular houses on the east side there, I think, about do they even belong in the Midway district as it's currently defined, or should they be included as a residential, with the adjoining residential district behind it?
We did have that discussion. So previously, we had talked about it being a sub-district of the Midway. That would be more residential in character. So we certainly could do that as well. But again, if you're thinking over time that the Midway district could get larger, then it would be appropriate to leave them in.
And this is not in the historic district, correct?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
But keep in mind that there are different levels of historic districts. So you have no locally designated historic district, as I understand it, that would,
I thought that the Midway was a national historic district.
but it's a national, it's not a local.
Correct, I'm just saying national.
Right.
So it would be more problematic, I guess I would say, if you demolish all of it, potentially.
Not really, no.
Well, not legally, but potentially. I think I think from a policy standpoint, I think the city would not want to encourage the demolition of those houses. Let me just say that.
So then the question becomes, do we legitimize the two-family that's there? Do we remove them from the central business district?
I would say either you adjoin those with the other residential district, or create a sub-district like we were talking about on Longley and Miller, and carve out that as a separate residential use within the Midway.
Okay.
That's the way I.
Well, the biggest reason I don't like, I like keeping it the central business district is because you have a business on the far side over there. You've got a
Right.
business over on the other side of this one, and all across the street there are businesses also.
Yep.
So, so I think it should say CBD.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would become CBD, but maybe create a sub-district for those lots.
Okay, we can do
My
that.
mind, that's what I would do.
Yeah, we can do that, because you're right, I mean, there's business over here.
They're
there's
very
business over here.
narrow, and they are what they are.
So in that sub-district, is two-family going to be permitted? I mean, I think we have to.
I would be
Okay.
either way, either single family or.
Yeah, I think we have to do both. I mean, but again, let's differentiate between single-family, two-family, and multifamily.
Well, single family, two family, I'd be.
Yeah, okay. All right, where are we in terms of? In the community plan, the Midway focus area, it discusses encouraging new houses on Midway Court. The plan encourages new housing development that would be targeted to empty nesters and young professionals. Most of the Midway is zoned CBD. The parcel very back is actually zoned R1A, and that happened in 2012 in order to permit the expansion of the existing home and to permit the consolidation of two parcels. There was a landlocked parcel behind that one. So, should there be a mix of new dwelling units permitted on the Midway Court, specifically, new two-family dwellings and attached single-family? As a way to, I mean, the plan talks about a PUD as another way of handling that. We have not had a conversation about planned unit development. And so in order to just before we have that conversation, sort of stopgap measure, would you be thinking about allowing it by right two-family, and attached single-family on Midway Court?
I guess, Kevin, I had a question, just in terms of the street itself. How wide is the right-of-way back there?
One second, Frank's got the GIS up.
I guess.
That's a single lane road, it's probably 20 foot or less.
I guess that would be the question I would have, is if you're gonna redevelop that area, which I think is the goal
Over time.
over time, you would almost want a legally functioning street to make sure you had emergency egress, garbage, sanitation, whatever you needed access back there, that you had a wide enough right of way to make that function.
That could certainly be part of the development plan, that if somebody were to do that all at once. If it's incremental, that changes things. Obviously, if somebody came in and bought those houses, that would probably be part of the plan.
I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is if you're gonna redevelop it, you provide like a setback restriction and a requirement to dedicate such amount of frontage right away to allow that to occur over time. I mean, that's, people are gonna come back there for a house 10 feet back and then they can make it, that's not a good thing. Or a multi-family beside this.
So a couple different things. We all know that it's a narrow right of way. It's an odd configuration of lots, right? What we have back there is single family detached on this side and the back. So the brown house is either 2 or 3 families, not sure which. What would be preferable is if it was all done as one development that took access probably back through Cincinnati Bell, as opposed to up to Fort Thomas. That is beyond the scope of this rewrite. Let's just be honest.
When we did the comp plan update, and I'm thinking this was maybe 2000, that was the goal at the
Yeah.
time.
So we have a couple of different things. We can just, again, let's all keep in the back of our mind that every single one of those, except for the one at the bottom of the street, is non-conforming. Do we just keep what we have? Do we encourage someone to go in and potentially take 2 of the houses down and put in a duplex? Or 2-family? What's your pleasure?
I just think I'd be hesitant to make that conforming as it is.
Okay. So let's just keep it as it is.
Because it would preclude potential future redevelopment.
I don't think we are. I think we're just giving options over time. But we can certainly leave it with the indication in the comprehensive plan that says this is what we think should happen. And just leave it as it is.
I think Reynolds are own
Mixture.
certainly clean sheet of paper, we'd like them all to disappear and something new to be built in there.
Yeah, I mean, I
would say go out 18 or out, and say no.
this may not be pertinent in the case anyway, but at one point we discussed the creation of a community redevelopment corporation that can acquire those properties, not just those properties, but property
Probably like
to do something on a larger scale like that. That was one of the target areas that we envisioned that could go with, but that just never materialized.
It would be a great public-private partnership.
Right.
Okay, so there are 2 parcels that influence Midway that are not zoned CBD. One is the Cincinnati Bell parcel, which we were just talking about, that's the one that's in North Route, and then the VA hospital across the street. The community plan talks about if the VA hospital will have a lease, it should be an adaptive use for housing. We talked about that may or may not be possible, and perhaps it should have the ability to have other uses. And the community plan also talks about, given the strangeness of the parcels on both sides of the CBD here in Midway, and their need for parking, that it would be nice to have some of that land from Cincinnati Bell incorporated into those lots to create some additional parking and some additional access. So, the central question is, do we want to rezone those parcels in the case of the Cincinnati Bell building from R3 to CBD, in the case of the VA hospital from R1C to CPD. It's not really going to change much of anything other than just giving people recognition that this is a part of the central business district is perceived to be, and over time, we would like to see redevelopment consistent with.
The existing zoning doesn't make any sense right now. It makes more sense to be CBD.
Okay.
Got a utility building that's zoned multi-family and a hospital that's zoned single family.
Correct. And the CK Bell building is almost 3 acres. That'd be a great thing to add. It does have some tough topography. It does. And even though it's a utility building, it's a cool building. Got some nice art deco. Okay, so everybody's okay with these? Okay, and both the Midway and downtown currently, they are constrained, they are forced through the design review process through a set of guidelines that were adopted in 2002. And those deal with everything from roofline contours to gutters and rhythms of openings and masonry cleaning and siding treatments and paint colors. And then there's some guidance, and you realize I'm using the word guidance. It's a lot of shoulds. This is what should that deal with scale, height, and width. What I'm proposing to you is that we have some mandatory objective standards in the CBD that deal with things like massing and scale and vestibular design elements, such as transparency and rhythm of openings and those kinds of things. This in no way would replace the design guidelines that have been in place for 2002. It would just complement them. They would be objective standards that must be complied with. But I think it would be reasonable to give the design review board the ability to have deviations from them, but it would be in the zoning code as a mandatory standard. And I have a few up there that show what I mean. Anybody have any concerns about that? Okay. All right. So both the Midway and downtown are currently zoned CBD, but the Inverness is not. It's zoned general commercial. So the essential question is, should we rezone it to CBD? It has the feel of a walkable downtown area versus a general commercial area. I think most people would be surprised to learn that it's general commercial and not central business district. So, as a part of this update, should it become CBD?
Gas stations allowed in CBD because that's the only gas station in the whole north.
Yes, it is. So if we do this, the gas station would become a non-conforming use, and we spent a whole lot of time talking about that tonight. So it could continue, just like all the other ones, it just couldn't expand. But I think it's pretty important to give the signal that if that something happens to it, that it become a part of Inverness as opposed to another gas station. I mean, I know that it's the only one on the north side of town I've gotten gas there. But I think it should become a part of Inverness as opposed to a gas station at some point in time.
I don't think you'd ever fit a new gas station on that lot anyway.
No, I don't think you would.
And 25 years from now, you might never have gas stations, period. So it could become an electric vehicle charging lot, which is a whole other topic.
That's a whole different topic.
I guess what I realized in our discussion last year was really like there's like 4-unit apartments down there at the south end of what there should or shouldn't be in it. Now I was thinking about that one way or the other.
So at the time, when we were talking about doing form-based code, we actually were talking about the ones that you see 22, 18, and 15,
Yes.
bringing the district down that far. Now, there is some rationale now that we're just going to do central business district, and that was actually the next question. Do we keep the current boundaries for Inverness, or do we make it smaller or bigger? We certainly could get rid of those duplexes that are down there on the south side of the park. I think it makes a fair amount of sense to either get the other two or take them all out. But to have it split down the middle doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, would you be allowed to have a duplex in the CBD?
We would actually have to do that, but we could do the same kinds of things we did before. I mean, we're going to have to make some special standards for Inverness anyway, because the buildings are smaller and various other things. But like I said, we either got to put them all in or take them all out. I think we probably should just take them all out. But
And then all the way at the top, 922 to 918, are those single families?
yeah, so that's actually the next question. If we're going to change the district, do we then pull those out? They're single family, they're used as single family today, all of them. And it's, I mean, right now they're all zoned general commercial.
Yeah, well, I would vote to get rid of those, the duplexes, lock them in with the other duplexes, and then get rid of the single families and let those become, the single family and appropriate zone for those.
Yeah, R1C.
And then everything else become CBD.
So keep in mind that 919 is a single-family dwelling that's been converted, I believe, to an insurance office.
It is.
So we need to keep that in. Okay. Pam, was there something else you wanted to say?
No, I'm in agreement with that.
Okay.
I was just curious where those four duplexes are there south of the little square there that we have now. What is the adjacent zoning there? Is that a single family that's south of there? Or?
No, it's R3. The 2218 and the 15 are zoned R3.
I understand they,
Oh, I'm sorry.
what I'm saying is south of there, the adjacent house.
Oh, I think it's R1C.
Okay.
But you see the R3 line does that funky thing?
Yeah. So you're proposing to make all four of those R3? is
Yeah.
what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. And then and I think what's further north on Fort Thomas Avenue is R1C.
So those two houses would be R1C then?
Oh, I think it's 3.
Or 3?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there is that multi-family that faces Robert Way, so that I would keep in the CBD.
Yeah, that will stay in CBD, yes. And then across the street is the mixed use, the corner,
Right.
and, yeah, okay. All right. All right, so I think we've answered the question that we want to keep all of that, having non-residential on the first floor. And we are done for tonight.
Just real quick on that. This is Inverness, right?
Yep.
The old balloons, the triangular building there on the corner on the east side, are we also going to keep that commercial on the first floor where Spinney's Barber Shop is now?
Right, and yeah, I think that's, this is what I was recommending, is that we would just have, what's on the west side and the gas station would have to have non-residential on the first floor. What do y'all think about where Smitty's is? You want to allow it to be all? You want to require it to have non-residential on the first floor? Okay.
I prefer to keep that storefronts on that first floor.
Yeah, so we'll incorporate that as well and into the prohibition against residential. All right, so let's take community comments on CBD.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a curiosity question. Do you have the final thing? Here. It's me again, Anita. Just out of curiosity. That's right, I have to notice it as the 4 houses that you mentioned, aren't those historical? On South Fort Thomas Avenue, the red houses between the old ice house?
I don't know that.
Well, the old ice house and Cloverleaf Dairy, those in between. When we did the 4.5 years ago, those houses specifically were on a board right over here, and the woman that came down from, was that Columbus or whatever, she was telling people that those houses are a blight on our city. That turned me away from the plan that I was working on the committees with, because how dare she say those houses were a blight when other houses, you could point out other areas even that Midway Court maybe, she didn't point out those being a blight. And I thought, those are old houses. So if they are national historical, will they become local historical? I mean, they're not, people have been actually working on those houses and have made them look better, have painted them, and have improved them. So why would we want to call them a blight?
I can't speak to why she would have, or why anybody would have said that, I guess. I don't know if they're within the National Historic District or they're not. But I think that given their age, their relationship to the rest of the district from a contextual standpoint, I would think they could potentially be eligible if they're not.
Okay. And that's why sometimes I get my little bristles up because I'm thinking, these are people that aren't here. They aren't from here. They haven't been here. They didn't go to Cloverleaf Dairy on their bicycle. They didn't go to the ice house. And then how dare you say that certain areas are blight when they really aren't? They're not. You know, they are not Drees homes, and I'll point that out because we're going to have the Drees subdivision and that kind of stuff. And since I work for Drees, I'm not going to badmouth Drees. But, you know, they don't, not everybody can have a brand new house. And they are trying to make the improvements on what they have. So don't badmouth what little bit they do have. We used to have a lot of starter homes. We don't have starter homes anymore. Those are gone. We really don't in Fort Thomas like we used to. So that's all I want to say is please don't call it a blight.
I guess the only other thing I would add is we don't have a local historic district. The city doesn't designate. As far as I know, Kevin, we don't have any designated local.
Are they able to do what?
Designate historic areas.
No, I don't think so.
Like the VA hospital when I was a kid growing up, and some of the other homes.
Yeah, the city itself just doesn't have a program that does
And I'm not saying that we have to make it that, but I just don't want to see some of these homes, like I saw in the picture of the big White House down close to the city building. I hate to see thoughts that that would maybe be torn down because somebody wants it to be a business versus a single family home. I don't want to see us lose. I grew up when the sign said, Fort Thomas, the city of beautiful homes. That's what I remember. And I know I'm one of the ancient ones that everybody wants to move out and that kind of stuff. But let's try to keep some of this beautiful home character that we do have. And we really do. Even if we have some new ones coming in. So that's all I'm going to say.
I believe it is a historical zone. I believe it's been designated that. It's referred to that at the design review board, saying we can't do this because it's in a historical zone. There's 3 historical zones in Fort Thomas at this point. Who determines that? It wasn't me. It wasn't them. It was there before we researched and said, look, we already have historical zones. So the design review board is aware of it. Many of the community is becoming aware of it. I'm Sharon MacKnight. What we know, what we understand, back in 2001-202, it is authorized that the areas encompassing the central business district zoning classification is regulated in the zoning ordinance, be hereby designated and protected as local historic districts within the city. And that's why they formed the design review board. So they oversee the protection of those, the Midway and the Central Business District. And a big word is preserve and protect. So I hope everyone keeps that in mind when you're thinking about these zoning updates. Okay? Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
Penny, Kyle, and I live on Shine, and I guess I'm wondering, are there any plans
we've got the ball field on our street. Is there gonna, I mean, are there any plans that would be taken away or? Yeah. And we've got businesses on the top of our street. Or residential, is that gonna change at all?
Everything that's zoned single family today is going to be zoned single family in this process.
Because when I look at that, the dotted lines up at the top of our street, it kind of does a zigzag, and I'm not sure what that means. Because I never have a good quality of the picture I'm looking at.
You can tell from the picture what you're talking about.
So I'm kind of thinking, because there's like a garage behind the post, the new business called the Post. And I don't know if the zigzag goes behind like that gravel area that they've got for parking.
I tell you what, let's look at the zoning map after the end of the meeting, and we can go with that. But I can tell you unequivocally that if it's zoned single family today, it's going to be zoned single family at the end of this process. But where the central business district line is along Shawnee, we can look at the back at the end of the meeting. And if you're concerned about it, we can bring it back to the planning commission and talk about whether or not that line should change.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I wasn't expecting to have my own audience here and to talk about, my own personal space here, but yeah, as long and keep it shining in one way, because we do have to put one up the street now because they want to get to the post, where the post has the where you can go into their parking area. And I don't know if people realize it's still one way.
No.
And they go up the wrong way. So just, I don't know how to get that addressed or.
We can look at the signage down at the bottom and make sure it's adequate.
And if something like that remains a problem, you can reach out to chief of police. They're very receptive to looking at those type of situations, patrolling if it's a problem. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
Hillary Lander again. Just one comment. I keep getting the feeling that too many people think that rental property in this town is inherently evil. You're always looking at places that are the lower income, not so fancy places, and saying we want to redevelop this into something fancy that's going to cost a lot of money. I think this would actually damage the culture of Fort Thomas. One of the things I like about this place is that there are multiple income levels and age levels and other things in this town. Okay?
Well, any closing comments or?
Thank you all.
Just a reminder about the meeting tomorrow, if you're interested, or have some friends that can. And there's more of those opportunities. Just once again, this was something that was decided not very long ago. So the fact that might not be well attended tomorrow, if you can't attend, we can discuss those different times and adjust that for next month. These are some ideas that we had to bring in more community involvement. So, this is new, and there's going to be for, once again, 4 or 5 months, we're going to be having these opportunities. So, bring people to the meeting and, tell them about that. If they don't know, we're going to be advertising for it, so there'll be plenty of opportunities for comment.
We have a motion for adjournment?
Motion.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank y'all.